we don't get married so our wives take care of our deepest wounds and our little boy needs. I mean, that was mom and dad and some of what was going on there.
Welcome to the Crucible Project Podcast. The Crucible Project is a nonprofit organization committed to creating a world of men and women who live with integrity, grace, and courage, helping them to fulfill their God-given purpose. This podcast will discuss important and sometimes difficult topics while delivering practical life applications with men and women who are currently practicing this work. We are igniting Christ-like change in men and women through experiences of radical honesty and grace.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Crucible Podcast. My name is Andy Spell, and I will be the interviewer today. And I'm excited to welcome Andy Hartman, who is a clinical psychologist out of the Chicagoland area. This will be part one of a two-part interview that we would like for you to stay around for and hear what he has to share with us today. So, Andy, welcome.
Thank you, Andy. Nice to meet you, and it's an honor to be here with you.
Well, thank you. Hey, as we get started this morning, would you please tell me a little bit about yourself, things that the listening audience would want to know?
Okay. Well, as you said, I'm a clinical psychologist by training. I have a clinical practice in the Chicagoland area. I am also a consulting psychologist. I do a lot of leadership and team coaching for organizations, businesses. And so I do that across the country, and I've been doing that for about 20 plus years also. So I kind of wear two hats, but they're very similar, and it gives me a chance. It's all about helping people grow and kind of get conscious and get aware of blind spots in leadership and really step into their gifts and their potential and develop that. So if I'm doing that in the clinical practice or I'm doing that in a professional leadership coaching environment, I think they're pretty well overlapped and one and the same in many ways, because we all have to face, as we mature and commit, we all have to face the wounds, the injuries, the blocks and the barriers, the limiting beliefs we have about ourselves. And in this crucible work, as we know, we have to address the wounds that oftentimes carry some of the trauma or power that keeps us from our full gold that God gave us. So I love to do what I'm doing. I've been doing it a long time. Actually born and raised in Texas. Started out in ministry, actually, in my mid-20s. Was a part of a large mega church in the Chicagoland area. Did that for 4 or 5 years, and then really discovered through that I love the intense one-on-one interpersonal work. And so I transitioned out, went back to grad school, got my doctorate in counseling in my early 30s, and then launched my clinical practice around 1990.
Wow, fantastic. Thank you for letting us know all of that. That is good. And yes, you've already hit on some topics that we're going to be talking about this morning. So thank you for that. Tell me a little bit about your family.
Okay. I'm married. My wife, Lisa, we've been married 45 years. We have 3 grown children. Again, we've lived mostly in the Midwest here in the Chicagoland area, but my children are in their 30s, scattered throughout the 30s. So, and we actually have our first set of grandchildren. I say set because we have twins coming. So I'm about to enter the glorious world of grandparenting, but that's probably a month or so away.
And that is absolutely the best role on the planet I have found. Yes. I've got 2 grandsons and a granddaughter on the way. And
wow.
Yeah, it's the best.
Well, that's what I hear. I've been watching my same age friends, Google and drool over their grandchildren for decades. So I may get there very quickly.
Awesome. So you started, I call it soul work, interpersonal work back in the 90s. You did your work through MKP. Is that correct?
Right. Mankind Project was and still is a very powerful, I think, global network of men. They offer an initiation weekend. Uh, they called it the New Warrior Training Adventure. So I actually went through that in 1996. I was actually 40 years old. I had an 18-year marriage that was, uh, we were doing both a ton of work and it was getting nowhere. So it was kind of a desperate place. And let me roadmap this for you because uh, I got married, and I think within probably 2 or 3 years, we were in counseling because marriage was quite a surprise. We were both Christians and committed to our relationship to Jesus, and very sincere and a part of a healthy church. But boy, those early years of marriage just whacked us, and so we got into couples counseling pretty quickly. Um, and so by the time we had reached year 18, I think we'd probably been through 5 or 7 years of marital counseling. I had done individual counseling during that time as well. So we were not lacking effort, but we were not making any progress. So my weekend experience and my initiation into this kind of soul work, came out of a very painful place. Um, I was also, as I alluded to earlier, I was in ministry those first 5 years. So I was doing church. I had, I was working with people. I love that part. But again, you probably know some of this, Andy, as a pastor, working with others and trying to do your own work. That was quite a tension I lived with, that I couldn't seem to crack the code with my marriage. And so, I was actually, after 5 years, I went back to graduate school. So imagine this: I'm in training to be a psychologist. I'm in individual counseling. I'm in marital counseling, and it's going nowhere. It's like it didn't lack for effort, but something just wasn't working. And I think that's where the weekend I went on was a profound breakthrough weekend for me.
Yeah, I love that you said that you were the poster child for unproductive counseling.
Exactly. And I had great therapists. I mean, I live in the network of therapists. So I like to say I burned out some of the best therapists, my wife and I together, not because we wanted to, but the truth is I was so lost in my own, I call it kind of self deception. I completely believed that our marital pain and suffering was all about her. And my job was to help bring light to her so she could be, the partner I needed. But you can hear that, you can hear all the holes in that. But I sincerely and completely was was deceived. And secondly, I was kind of stuck in what I would call, now I didn't know it then, but kind of a victim role. I felt like, poor me. And the men's work we do in the Crucible Project certainly gave me some language to understand what I now understand to be the drama triangle. And when you're in pain and suffering and trying to explain it, usually you fall either in a victim persona, a villain persona, or a hero. So I kind of vacillated in my marriage between a victim, poor me, to quote heroics. Neither one of them are healthy choices, but that's kind of where I think I exhausted myself, I exhausted my wife, and I think I exhausted about half a dozen therapists in the Chicagoland area.
Man, yes, that's fascinating. And so we're going to just take a second there. So
Okay.
when in your marriage at that time, before you did your weekend, what did that victim role look like? And why in that triangle, if somebody's listening and they've never heard this before, and may give them a spark to say, man, I want to do some work around that. What is that triangle, the victim, the villain, the hero, and why is that unproductive?
The drama triangle came out of really the self-help movement in the 60s and 70s, and maybe even earlier than that. It came out of the 12-step programs back in the 30s and 40s, because they realized that the alcoholic or the addicted person usually has someone who's kind of codependent. and that person usually is serving in some way to co-create kind of the drama that goes on in that mess. So out of that pops what we call the drama triangle, which is, out anytime we feel threatened or hurt, our brain is actually wired. It's the victim. It's the fight or flight response. We will feel threatened, and that threat will always be perceived as outside of us. So what we know on the triangle is that people will take on, instinctive personas. They're not your personality. That they're not, identities. They're simply temporary personas to help you figure out what's going on. And so in my marriage, I actually now understand that in the stress and pressure of marriage and the pain that I was in and my wife was in, I perceived that I was a victim, that I was not loved, I was not understood, and my wife took on a persona which we would understand to be the villain, which is I have to kind of go after the truth, and I have to help this guy see the truth. And I played this poor me. Why can't you just love? Where's the love? And all that kind of stuff. Now, the third corner of the triangle is the hero, which for a lot of Christians, they kind of believe, well, isn't that the right one? Isn't that, God calls us to love, love our enemies, I guess would be no, because you got to understand, Andy, that all three are simply temporary ways to explain the pain, but it does nothing to solve it. And you can actually get pretty entrenched in your persona, because that's how you define it. And I think oftentimes these personas actually get developed in childhood because we witness it in our families growing up. We usually saw parents that were trying to figure out stuff, and we usually see one parent probably take on one of those three personas, the villain or the victim. And so depending upon some of our temperament, we might tend to then early in our life actually understand this is how you survive, threat and stress and pressure is you kind of get small like a victim, or you get big like a villain, or you just suck it up and become a hero, like rise above it and do the right thing, and maybe a little bit of martyrdom in that hero stuff. So I think that, again, it's helpful to understand it, but the goal is to get off the triangle, man, to get on what I call the solid ground of taking 100% responsibility for yourself in the situation. And that was kind of my huge breakthrough on my weekend. Was I got rattled. I got a 2x4 across the head, and with love, that said, dude, this is all about you, man. Your marital pain and suffering starts and ends with you. And I was ready to receive it because I as I said, I had a half dozen years of therapy and counseling and couples counseling and prayer and support groups. Oh, by the way, I had a couple of, men's groups I was a part of. And like any church, I mean, you encourage men to get into authenticity. And I was a part of that. And I had brothers around me that in my victimhood, I had totally convinced, because I was convinced that I just had a tough life, and so we're going to pray for you, and we're going to lay our hands on you. We're going to help you get through and pray for the breakthrough, and of course the breakthrough was her. So, so I was convinced totally. So I convinced, not because I was trying to trick my brothers, but I just naturally, they loved me. So of course they were a bit biased toward me and kind of saw that, yeah, he's suffering, man. We're going to pray for you. And so that was another kind of, in addition to all the therapy, was I had a lot of spiritual support groups around me that were buying into my deception.
Man, and it's so hard because when we're in the middle of it, I don't, like you said, I don't think I realized I was being deceived or the deception, or
Exactly.
I can't when I've been stuck in those situations, I've realized I can't even honestly look at it because I'm so in my mind, or I'm so in my hurt, or I'm so in my pain, or
Isn't that
whatever
true?
it is,
Yes, yes,
or I even look at it and I don't know what I'm going to do about it. I can't take it out and look at it in a organized or a logical way. I can't make
exactly,
sense of it.
exactly. That is so true, Andy. And I think because I think you need to remember when you're on the triangle, you are completely convinced that you're right.
Yeah.
That's a part of the symptom of being in that fight or flight is I'm hurt and I I'm hurt by her and I'm right. And so you're
Yeah.
right. I mean, you can't get a handle on it all by yourself.
I can't. I remember when I got home from my initial weekend in 2010. We were living in this house, and I've got a stairway right back here. And I came in and I hugged my wife and I sat her down on the steps and I said, "I'm still trying to figure out what all happened this weekend, but I want you to know that this weekend wasn't about you or the kids or anything that you've done. I realized the weekend was about me and what I need to do, what I need to fix, where I need to get healing, where I've been wounded, and where that healing can come from so I can be the man I need to be." Because I wanted her to know, it wasn't a weekend that we just talked about how terrible our lives were and how terrible everybody was and or
Right.
whatever, it just, yeah.
Well, and I love that, Andy, because I think that's exactly what happened for me too. I mean, and I would say now, I didn't understand it then when I listened to your story and my own, is both of us got off that triangle and started taking 100% responsibility for who we are, what we bring, and being the man we want to be, and stopped over focusing on our spouse or that. So and that was my experience as well. I came home, as they say on the weekend. You don't want to talk a lot about the weekend. You just want to bear fruit. But
Right.
I did some of that same thing with my partner. Help I've been chasing a rabbit here for decades, and I had this all about you, and really it's all about me. And that was a profound next 2 years. I can't say we got all fixed, but it radically shifted how I approached the pain that sometimes I felt or was able to open and hold her pain in a way that wasn't triggering.
Yeah. And one of the reasons I stay, and I've got a Crucible group now that I meet with. And one of the reasons I meet with that group is we met yesterday, and I'm amazed at how quickly I can jump back in the triangle.
Yep.
Like without men to help me see what's going on, I can be back on that triangle in a second in my life and setting up victim, villain, hero, and it's their fault and they did. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden,
Yeah.
I'm
So
stuck there. So on the weekend, how did how did God show up for you? What happened on the weekend that you said kind of? I think you used the words we were talking earlier this week. It popped you out of the victim triangle. What happened on the weekend that helped that shift to start, as you can tell it to us today?
Well, great question. And again, it was the collective weekend as a whole. There wasn't any particular moment, but this weekend really offered me, I would say, the microscopic truth. And the second, I think, men on the weekend, the leaders began to pick up that I was, you know, oh, this good guy, and I just had a tough wife, and I mean, I think they just, kind of gotten got in my face with love and kind of said BS. That's just, you know, that's one way to look at it. How's that working for you, huh? How's that working? 18 years? Yeah, yeah, you loving it? So I had to go deeper, and a part of, and I had a lot of therapy, so this wasn't all brand new stuff, but it really helped me uh, by waking me up and not kind of buying my story. It began to pop me out of that victim role because I began to see, oh my gosh, I have I have been self-deceived this whole time. It's just the story I've been carrying. What's another story I could carry, or what's the truth? Not a story. And I think that with the weekend, through all the processes, began to help break through my defenses and my self-deception, my unconsciousness about this, and help me see, dude, I've been bringing this little boy to my wife to take care of and love. And yeah, I had wounds and things, but I began to kind of realize and wake up through the processes on the weekend that no, I mean, we don't get married so our wives take care of our deepest wounds and our little boy needs. I mean, that was mom and dad and some of what was going on there. So once I got clear about that, I think that's what popped me out. Oh my gosh, I got a lot of work here. I've got work that I want to do because I want to be the man God made me to be. I don't want to be, bringing my little wounded boy to my wife and expecting her to be the love and the nurturing breast and all the things I never had. And so I think that's some of the processes that helped me kind of get clear. And of course, out of the weekend, I was a part of a group for a long time, and I'm still a part of initiated men's groups. And this is decades later. So they have LAQ always served to be that counterbalance to my ability to trick myself and to help me take a look at myself first.
On the weekend, did you discover a wound for you that really kind of summed up why you were stuck, or why you wanted, your wife to help heal that part of you, or that kept you in that victim role? Was there a certain way you can frame what
Sure.
maybe that wound looked like?
Sure can, because I think it helped me put a framework around that deepest wound. And for me, my deepest wound, I was raised in the South in Texas uh, by I think a good set of parents, but my mother was a victim herself of trauma and sexual abuse. My father was a country boy from Oklahoma, 12th among 12 children. So I think they got married 17, 18. So, but, so they had a boatload of their own challenges. But what I discovered, Andy, was this, that my wound was about, my belief was that I'm a burden and I'm a bother. So that was it in a nutshell. That my little boy grew up believing that I'm a burden and a bother, and so the way to cope, my defense or my coping mechanism was I'll take care of myself. I won't be needy. I'll be the good boy. And that's how you get love, and that's how I'll be seen and acknowledged. So this I'm a burden, I'm a bother was my wound. So that got real clear on a weekend. And not just clear, but it also gave me some processes by which I could take a big step, giant step into that wound and really do work around what the original injuries were. My mother was depressed because of some of her pain and suffering. So she really wasn't a nurturing mother. I mean, she was a wonderful woman, but and did everything. She's the kind that was up at 5 a.m. and slamming down 3 meals a day. And I mean, this was the South in the 50s and 60s. So that's what she could bring me. But what was very missing was a sense of nurture, love, tuning in. And so I came to believe in with the relationship with my own mother that I was a burden to her, and the best way that I could be loved is to not be a burden. So that's what I was unconsciously bringing to my wife is I'm a burden. I'm a bother. I'll be a good guy. I'll suck it up. I'll just take it. But in return, I kind of created a little deal in my head, that okay, I'm going to be the good guy, and you're going to just bathe me with love, just because I'm such a good guy. And that, of course, doesn't work in any marriage, because that my wife didn't marry a little boy that, was just needed to be nurtured. I mean, she married a man. She hoped I was a man. She hoped I would bring, all that, in, the truth, grace, mercy, um, you know, care, love for her, etc. So that's kind of in a nutshell my wound that began to help me kind of grow, which is when I got clear with that, I could move into space where I could more consciously ask for what I need and not hit this burden wall. I'm a burden and a bother. Don't talk about what you need.
Man, that is so good. And I think when we listen to this, our stories so intertwine with other men's stories and women's stories. Women, if you're listening to this podcast, you may relate because it's humankind stories. But I'll never forget my wife. About 5 or 6 years into our marriage, I was needy, and we had 2 children, and I was needy, and I needed her affirmation, and I needed her just all kinds of stuff from her. And one day she goes, "I can't give enough to you. I cannot give enough to you, and be wife and mother and take care of myself too. I don't know what's going to have to happen, but I can't do this." And it was a wake up call for me. And I wish I'd have done some work then. I had the mind as a minister that that counseling was for everybody else. I didn't need it. And I wish, anyway, but I did my weekend and getting healing now. But we carry these wounds.
We do. And I'm curious about your story, because when she came to you with that truth, about she can't do it or meet all your needs. I mean, where did you go? Do you feel like you went to a poor me place like a victim, or you took a heroic role, like, okay, I'll just suck it up and pray more and, just take care of myself?
Yeah, I think on the inside, I sucked it up and I thought, okay, I'm not going to be so needy. So, but then I took on the heroic. I can do it all myself.
Exactly.
I'll just do it all myself. I can carry the weight of the world on my shoulders. And it's so yesterday in my group, something has gone on here lately. And I told them, you know what? I have gotten back in that I can do it all myself mindset again, and had to work through that again to where it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Even though I live it, I think I'm living it, but I can shut that side down, that vulnerable, ask for help side down really quickly.
Sure. And I think as a counselor now, in that world I live in, I oftentimes see, especially I work with a fair amount of Christian men and who, really when we get the feedback from our wives or, that we realize our needs are, not being met, I mean, we'll just kind of go into what I would call sometimes a very spiritualized kind of response, which is it's just me and Jesus, and it's about just upping my game with regard to connecting with God and being filled with the Spirit, and almost like being filled with the Spirit makes you invincible, like you can take anything, but which is all hero stuff, as you said. It's kind of going into that. And I'm not saying that God isn't a powerful lover, a deep lover of our soul, but it's a both and. It's that, and I need to be able to handle my needs in a adult responsible way, like 100% responsibility, not to take care of myself, but to manage my pain in a way that is healthy and constructive, which involves my partner if she's able and available or willing at times, but it also involves the community of men oftentimes that we need around us. It is our faith in Jesus, and sometimes it's just the grief of, there is no perfect love out there.
And what's amazing to me is I think part of that is I just don't want to bother people. They're busy. They've got a lot going on. This is my role at church. I'll just do it. But the minute I ask for help and other people jump in, or they'll say, man, I'll help you with that, I'm like, I need to be asking. So it's just this, this roller coaster that I get on. And then whenever I have the team around me, it's awesome. And when I learn to do it, or I learn to ask for help, it takes that weight off. So how did God show up? One more thing, just how did you feel like God showed up on your weekend that maybe he gave you a word you needed to hear?
Well, I felt like God showed. I mean, it's interesting. I'm a journaler, so I've always found value in journaling, uh, and and so I had, dozens of filled journals, that those first 18 years. And when I look back at them at some later time, I realized that they were all just, well, they were prayers for sure, but they were uh, prayers that God would change my wife and bring healing to our relationship. Again, code words for change her. And and
Yeah.
and apparently, I felt like God was you know running a deficit on ideas. So my journals were filled with how He needed to change my wife. So sadly, I had pages and pages of ideas for God, and and boy, my journaling changed that weekend, and that's how I think God showed up. Is, dude, I love you. I'm
Wow.
here. I'm your lover. I'm the one who's going to help you, not her, you, you know, heal, and I'm with you. So I think God showed up in the sense of really just complete. It's like taking your head, and slowly changing the perspective completely. I'd stopped over focusing on my wife, and I think God helped me see I'm a wounded guy. I'm a golden man, full of God's value and worth. I'm a broken man. Every man is broken, and God said, I'm here with you. I'm going to help you through this community of men, and through my Holy Spirit. I'm going to grow you where you didn't realize you needed to grow, and that became kind of the breakthrough.
Yeah. And Andy, what I have found in our walk of soul work, and soul work is, I think it's got to be connected to Jesus, God, and the Spirit, is that when I am connected with God in a powerful way through His Spirit, that I find I am healthier because I
Mm-hmm.
start realizing that He needs to be the one through prayer, through meditation, through silence, that He can speak to those places. But man, when I get busy and I've got a block in that relationship, man, I can get off kilter pretty quickly.
Yep, yep, and we all are, and I think that's where I every day of my life I am still journaling and I'm still praying, but I start with myself. I start and end with myself. God, show me, shine light unto me, my self deception today, because of that very fact. As you said, I can
Right.
get off kilter. I can end up on the triangle, with any moment of stress. That's just in my wiring. I'm not flawed. That's just your DNA: fight, flight, or freeze, and that's where we go. And so I know I have profound ability to be deceived. So I need men in my life that will pull out the 2x4 and say, dude, you're deceived. Or I pray every day, God, show me my trickiness, deception, show me
Right.
my sin, show me how I am tricking myself. And that, quite frankly, is a lot of what I do in my counseling work and in my leadership, coaching work. Is, I mean, they may not be all Christians, but the truth that this is the truth. I mean, most of us are stuck in some kind of self-limiting belief, and sometimes that starts with what we think is true about ourselves, or what we think is true about our partner or the world around us. So
Yeah, that's great. So we've ended part one. Folks, I want to invite you into part two because we're going to talk about some of the things that Andy does with leadership and also in counseling of couples. So this has been good. You've heard his heart. You've heard the work that he's done that helped him with his marriage, with his life moving forward. So join us next week, and we're going to dive into what soul work and what work that we do can look like in leadership and in our marriages.
For more information about our weekends, please go to thecrucibleproject.org. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Rate and review wherever you are listening and subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. Also, don't forget to check out myjourney2.com for your free 2-week trial. That's myjourneyto.com. Thank you for listening.